So now it's time to bring in the dahlias. In this video, I'm going to walk through how I cut back, dig up, and store dahlias so that they are ready for next season. Now, I did do a video about this last year, but for this year, I am changing the way that I'm storing the dahlias, so stay tuned till the end and I will talk about that. If you're not familiar with dahlias, they are a flower that is native to Mexico, and they are one of my absolute favorite flowers to grow. The blooms come in different colors and different sizes and shapes, and it's just a really fun flower to grow. But dahlias aren't hardy, and so in northern growing zones, you need to cut them back, dig up the tubers from which they grow, and store those tubers over the winter, and then you can bring them back out again next season. And while that might seem like a lot of work, if you are into dahlias like I am, it is well worth the effort. So once you get a frost in the fall, the foliage is going to die back, and you want to make sure to get the dahlias out of the ground before temperatures get too much colder. You don't want the ground to freeze because that's going to damage the tubers. So once that foliage gets killed by the frost, you can cut it back. And I take all of this foliage that gets cut back and it goes right out onto the compost. So nothing is going to waste here. And then it's time to dig them. I use a garden fork, or you can use a shovel, and really the trick is to be careful. You want to ease them out of the ground without damaging any of the tubers themselves. And then you want to brush off the dirt if it's particularly wet and there's a lot of dirt or mud or clay stuck to them. You certainly can hose them down. We haven't had rain much at all, so the soil is actually really dry, and it made it a lot easier to dig up and clean off the dahlias this year. So then once I have all the dahlias dug up, I'm going to put them in the garage. I want to have them sit for a little bit, for a few days at least, in a cool, dry environment. It's also a good time to check out the dahlia tubers themselves and get rid of any that are broken or have rotted. Another thing that people often do around this time is to separate out the tubers, which is how you divide out these plants and get more of them. I don't typically do that at this stage. If I am going to divide them out, I will do that next season when I bring them out in the spring. Alright, so when it comes to storing the dahlias, there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can store them in a container with vermiculite, newspaper works, or sawdust. In the past, I have used sand. Sand has been the thing that has, I think, been the best for me. I've had the most success and the most consistent success with keeping them over winter when I'm using the sand. You don't want them to dry out over the winter, but at the same time, you don't want too much moisture so that they rot. It is a bit of a balancing act that you need to try to follow. And I just find that sand works really well. So these will get stored in our basement. You can store them in a cold cellar. You can store them in an unheated garage as well, as long as it doesn't get too cold. I'll have to go clear some space for them, but that's the price you pay for having dahlias in northern climates. And as you can probably imagine, these are heavy, so I'm going to be using the hand truck to get them into the house. Even though the sand is heavy, once I get them into the house, I'm not going to have to move these containers again. Another thing I like about the sand is that it is really easy to reuse each year. Now, I actually ran out of sand to finish doing this, but that's okay. I've got the dahlias inside, and I'm going to go pick up a bit more sand just to top up the containers and keep the dahlias evenly covered. I also have some of my tropicals in here as well, so cannas, calla lilies, and elephant ears. I'm storing them in the same way. And so that's really all there is to it. Cut back the dahlias, dig them up carefully, let them dry out for a few days in the garage, and then store them in containers covered in sand over the winter. So all that's left is to occasionally check them over the winter to make sure they aren't getting too dry. You can always add a little bit of moisture in the containers. Other than that, all that remains is to dream about where I'm going to put the dahlias out next year. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, happy gardening.